Hi, I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Hello, thank you for joining us. You are watching For the Greater Good with your host, Evelyn Richardson, here on AccessTV.org. Today I'm excited to share with you my special guest. Her name is Mayra Esquilin. She is the CEO of Hartford Areas Rally Together here in Hartford at 385 Washington Street. Her organization is a nonprofit organization and helps communities in the greater Hartford area. I'm very excited to share her with you, and we will be asking her some questions and see what her organization is offering to Hartford communities and how we can get on board to see positive change in our communities. Thank you for joining us, Mayra. I'm excited
Evelyn,
to have you here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm very grateful. I thank you for putting on this show that's so needed in our community so that people know there's lots of good stuff happening out there.
Exactly. So I always say this, we have questions for you. So one thing that I noted on the Hartford Areas Rally Together website was an interesting quote or comment, as you would. It says, uniting people to create positive changes in Hartford. And then I went further to see, along with your missions and your purpose, how it talked about, collaboratively and acting together to be able to create this change. And it didn't single out any certain area. And I know that in Hartford, we are kind of staunch to always think territorial. So I appreciated being able to see it like reflected like that on your webpage. And another comment that was there, and I'll go back to these as questions later, was that can Hartford's future be better than its past? Don't answer yet. We're going to give you that opportunity. So it's wonderful to hear that Hartford Areas Rally Together was established in 1975, and that you're very big on systemic change, holding decision makers accountable to be able to help the communities and neighborhoods to create that systemic change. So with my first question, I would like for you to tell us about the young Mayra, Mayra the child. Where did she grow up? Where did she live? Where did she come from? And how did she get passionate about this type of work?
So the young Mayra grew up in the north end of Hartford on the corner of Sims and East Street. Was primarily my neighborhood. I grew up kitty corner to the old jailhouse. And grew up in an activist family. My great aunt and godmother was Maria Sanchez, and my mom was an activist. We come from a Puerto Rican community that came here, migrated here from Puerto Rico in the 1950s. My family came here looking for, like all families, another opportunity, a greater opportunity. My grandmother had 9 children. And actually, they started off in Massachusetts and working in the tobacco fields. It's the middle of the piece. And then they heard about Hartford through that network of people and came down primarily because my mom had polio. She was one of those last individuals who were afflicted by polio. And they knew of this hospital in Newington that was a children's hospital and would provide services to people. And so that's how they came in. And got right into the community and being able to kind of, learn and connect and learn English and learn a very different rhythm of life, different from an island. They were coastal people, so they were used to waking up and looking at an ocean. Yeah. And that's where we grew up. That's how I grew up in the neighborhood, and we've moved all along the north end. But that was the story of many Latinos. The north end of Hartford was the gateway community, the gateway neighborhood for many, many different cultures, and it was certainly that for me and my family.
That's interesting, because what I find about a lot of the Hispanic population, just as you said, that a lot of it started in the north end of Hartford. And I can relate that to how you come from Puerto Rico and you still have this strong bond with your native land. Mm-hmm. And then you come to other communities, and in this case to somewhere like Hartford, and your roots start in the north end. You don't lose that when you go away from it.
You certainly don't lose it. I think, for myself, and I think for my, other individuals that, that are Latino that grew up in the North End, we talk about Sim Street and East Street. We talk about, the fire hydrants being open. We talk about when they built Sand School. It was interesting. My mom and I were having a conversation just on Sunday, which was the day of the Puerto Rican parade. My mom hasn't been to the parade in years, and I really now know how long it is, because the Puerto Rican parade actually would start in the North End. When it first was created, the coming into it actually went from north to south, and so there were all of these floats along, Chestnut Street and Bellevue Street and all of these little streets and side streets, and that's really where the parade was founded and came out of. Because that's where the community was.
Okay, so share with us about HART and what is your title. Well, we talked about your title and position over there. So just share with me about HART, the organization.
So Hartford Areas Rally Together, affectionately known as HART, was created in the 1970s, really out of the organizing movement of Saul Alinsky or community organizing in general in the country. It was after the riots of the 60s, which many communities like Hartford, cities like Hartford, were left pretty much abandoned and distraught. And there was a lot of white flight, and lots of others kind of moved into the suburbs. And what was left was an impoverished community, and people trying to rebuild. And so in the organizing efforts, HART started, actually its founding papers come from a priest at St. Peter's Church, who invited Saul Alinsky's group to come in and assist in the founding of the organization. And the mission was to take the people who were left and help them build their power and their capacity to really transform their neighborhood into what was abandoned buildings and distraught into, vibrant neighborhoods and community. And we've kept completely towards that mission, that this is really a resident-led effort, that the people most affected by issues should be the people who are leading it. They know the answers. They know what's going to make a difference. From there, we've built 2 other programs. In the 20 years ago, the residents themselves really started focusing on home ownership. They didn't just want to rent their houses. They wanted to own it. And so they worked with HART staff and its board of directors, and started to build a home ownership program for low and moderate income individuals. And through our organizing efforts, really started to push the banks on redlining, because before banks could literally discriminate against people of low income, and sadly in the city of Hartford, low income generally means people of color. And started organizing with the HUD and the Housing and Urban Development and the feds and everyone else, using our power to change policies and practices. And so we created the first time low and moderate income housing program to not just give people, we wanted people to own their home, and which is the American dream. And so everyone's entitled to it, and and everyone should have the opportunity to it. And we've been doing that for 20 years. And very proud of that program. And it is available to everyone across the city. And now we're helping parents in a program called HOPE, helping our parents engage. We learned about 10 years ago, almost 13, that there's a lot of changes in education that have taken place. And for parents, then the system has gotten a little bit more complicated, a little bit more complex, and the needs are certainly greater for their children to do well. And parents asked us for help, and we've been designing programs and services to help all parents be able to do for their children what all parents want, make sure all of their hopes and dreams come true.
That's right. Okay. Mayra, so this word, and you know what, amazingly enough, I have a decent amount of vocabulary and definitions in my head, but I'm always happy when I learn new words, because and I like to test them out real soon. So although I've heard it in languages and I didn't really grasp it or need that word before. So parochial, I learned it a couple of weeks ago from Charles Barrow. He sat on this show with me, and he said that the leaders in Clay Arsenal, that were involved with Clay Hill Improvement Association, were parochial, and that's why they didn't sometimes cross over the line to Clay Arsenal. Wait a minute, Clay Arsenal, and you know enough to know, because that's the neighborhood that you grew up in, that they're across the street from each other.
And there were two neighborhoods.
Exactly.
And now they're one.
And now they're one. So when I say that word to you, parochial, what can you share with me on how you feel the dynamics of North and South today?
Well, I think that in some ways we've gotten very parochial about the North-South allegiance and, in stance. I think, I remember a time where the African-American community and the Puerto Rican Latino community had very strong alliances, that they really could reflect on their African diaspora as a thing that connected them. And, while we had different reasons for why we came here, some, we knew that we were here together and that we had to work together to really make the best of it, and do that work. I think now when we use North-South, sadly, I think we use it as a code for Latinos and African Americans, and which saddens me deeply. And I think that given what's going on, me personally looking at the whole city, which is a thing that I'm very blessed with as the executive director of HART, to have to reflect on an entire city. I'll look at all of the data by neighborhood, across neighborhoods. I'm looking at tons of information, whether it be education, public safety, housing, and not just housing in terms of rental, home ownership being a big critical piece of building a vibrant neighborhood. Looking at, things of economic development and wealth, attrition, and being able to kind of figure out what's going on. And seeing such a dichotomy, I think our parochial stance has kind of created this is ours, that's yours, or the pieces. Yet the system doesn't operate that way. When we look at education and when we look at public safety and when we look across the board, we can't allow a system to think about resources here and resources there, exactly, but what's for the greater good, which, I love the title of the show, because it is, it is this notion of us thinking across multiple generations and not just the here and now.
So, big ticket item, education. That's your area. That's what you're good at. How does being parochial affect education in our communities?
I think it limits us. It really limits us and our ability to allow us to grow. And when we look at, when we looked at how, back in, in the past, we had this separate, quote, but equal system, and we changed that. Parochial creates that. We'll create two separate systems. And I think, with education, when I look at academics outcomes for children, and I see that one is clearly, schools in one geographic area clearly doing better than schools in another geographic area, when I look at the resource disbursement, when I look at those pieces, it raises serious concerns. Is separate, are we, okay with separate but equal? Especially in today's world where education, where we live, we need to raise our children, and we need to really provide the kind of educational opportunities for our kids, because they are truly living in a global environment. Yes. It's not just, a theory of thinking in like we had in the past where, we're like, well, we live in a big world and we think global. We truly are in a very global environment. And so we need to make sure that our children, we don't separate them, and that we give them the opportunity to develop and learn. This city is rich, very rich with diversity. People come from all over the world. When I look at the number of languages that are spoken in our schools, when I look at our refugee resettlement numbers in terms of where they're coming from, and I'm like, we need to give our children the opportunity to interact with each other, to learn side by side, and to be able to have high quality education, because it's the world that they're going to live in. It's the world that they're going to have to, interact with. And I think today that, on a touch of a button, they could be having a conference call with Hong Kong and really having a whole global conference with people and interacting. We really need to make sure that our kids are ready for that, and that opportunity should be theirs.
Okay. Thank you, Mayra. Right here, we're going to take our break and get back to you in a minute. Thank you for joining us on For the Greater Good here on accesstv.org with our special guest, Mayra Esquilin of Hartford Areas Rally Together. Be back soon.
At Hartford Public Schools, we care about one thing above all, the future of our kids. That's why we're dedicated to providing all students with the knowledge and skills needed in the new global culture. Hartford Public Schools is thriving. More student success stories, more world-class facilities, more university and corporate partnerships, more amazing talent coming and staying in Hartford. This is how education is supposed to work. Welcome to Hartford Public Schools, where the future is present.
Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining us here on accesstv.org for The Greater Good with Evelyn Richardson, your host, and our special guest, Mayra Esquilin of Hartford Areas Rally Together. Mayra, when we left, we were talking about this divide between the north, the residents in the north of Hartford and the south of Hartford. I'm curious to know, what do you think it would take for us to all realize that we have power in numbers? How do we come back together so that we can do the best work that we can, so that we can implement some strategies to be effective in our city and in our state and get the resources or the advantages that we need for our children and our families?
Well, Evelyn, we talked a little bit. We often talk about the north end and we often talk about the south end as two. But there's a whole section called Central, which is the downtown West End Asylum neighborhood, which we often forget about in the conversation between the North End and the South End. And, one of the critical components for us as, North End communities and South End communities is to really have the dialogue about where we stand, and to have the dialogue about what's happening at Central. Because while we've been so busy pulling for South and pulling for North and bickering about, what they get versus what we get, there has been a whole section of our community that has been busy at work. And they're bad people, and not that they're, don't have the intentions of having a bright, beautiful, vibrant city. That is a mutual goal of everyone's, is that their strategies and how that's happening. For someone like me who lives in the South End or is a neighborhood advocate, then raises the question of how involved are residents in the North End, in the South End, involved in these dialogues about what's happening in Central, the development of downtown, the incredible amount of housing that's being developed. We've had this conversation, which is on one end you're torn because a good thing that housing and people are living in the community. But at the other end, it raises a question for me as a leader and an advocate about the voice, and what does that mean for the average resident who isn't engaged, who isn't involved, and how do we need to work collectively across the city, in the North and in the South particularly, which are the most impoverished neighborhoods, to say, how do we work collectively to get our people to be at the table when these decisions are being made?
That's right.
And to get the people engaged. And what are the implications of these decisions that are being made to our future? Because they will have serious implications, and I think that neither side really understands the full impact or has even thought about what's happening in Central and how will that affect us.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay. So I will share this. I used to be one of the people that said, the South End gets everything, the North End gets nothing. But at that time when I used to make comments like that, I realized today that I was ill-informed. That, so today I don't say that, but what I do say when I hear other people in our communities, just like a couple of days ago, a young man came on Facebook and he was a little bit offended, he said, without being jealous, but I'm offended that they have the Puerto Rican flag flying over the legislative, over the state capitol. So I responded to him and I said, I'm happy that you're not hating, because the fact of the matter is that we could get the same thing if our leaders advocate for it. So how do we go about doing that? So when you have that, I'm starting to notice that the reason that people that aren't at those decision-making meetings might feel slighted is because we're not coming together to talk about what is best for each other. So what I have learned is that, okay, now I don't necessarily look at a difference between what somebody is getting and what somebody isn't getting. I look at, have the people been at the table that need to get it for me there? And if they are there, are they speaking for me? And if they aren't speaking for me, how did I vote for them?
And those are all very good questions, Evelyn. I think, one of the things that people talk about when they say, the South End, remember, we've been an organizing agency for over 40 years. The root of our work has been in getting the residents as engaged. And we were never really designed initially to just be a South End organization. It just by happenstance that there were lots of other community organizing groups in the city of Hartford. One Chain was an organizing group in the North End. Asylum Hill Organizing Project was another organizing entity in Asylum Hill. There are other entities. Over the decades, they've fallen by the wayside, and HART has remained. But it always has been Hartford areas rallied together, and the work that we've done in the in the South with the residents that we were engaged with, because there was a time where leaders didn't want HART to pass Capitol Avenue. Capitol Avenue was a dividing line between North and South, and there were agencies and organizations that did some stuff in the North End, stuff in the West End, and and it became almost territorial based on funding needs and being able to create that. But that was never the intent of the organization. But what we've been able to do in the neighborhoods that we have been working in for the last 40 years is to really build resident organizing capacity, which is very different. Is being able to help people know the skills and be strategic, be able to collect data, be able to make sure that they're holding people accountable, be able to raise the political capital and power that they need, and to do that over a 40-year period. So on the surface, it looks like South kids, but a lot of the people in South are really residents. If you go to the Marge meetings, or the Maple Avenue Revitalization Groups meetings, or if you go to the Southwest Behind the Rocks NRZ, we're talking about 40, 60 people in attendance regularly, many of them residents. And so our goal at HART has been, since I came on as executive director and seeing the dichotomy of Central, is how do we need to build, how do we share the resources we have and the capacity and learning that we've come to help North End residents and North End organizations. There are many wonderful North End organizations that have been there for decades and have done phenomenal work. Well, how do we build their organizing capacity to be able to build that level of power and that level of engagement, to be able to sit at the table and those kinds of questions you're now asking. Are they representing me? Are they representing me well? What are they saying? And what are these decisions that impact my life? And where do I stand with that?
Exactly. Okay, so I have a question because, as I ride around, I'm always going somewhere. So I actually get to see Hartford a lot, through a different lens these days. And we all notice that downtown Hartford is changing. And I watch downtown Hartford change, and then I ride back into my community and I see that really very much isn't changing. So I see some people doing, development here, or maybe a house is being, patched up or rebuilt over there, but nothing very drastic that can change the landscape as drastically as downtown Hartford is being changed. So when I look at those things, it can't help but to regurgitate something in my spirit that Charles Barrow mentioned to me when I first got involved with community advocacy. And that was, Evelyn, and this was about 4 years ago, prepare for gentrification. Do you have any information on that for our viewers?
Well, I think, downtown is changing. And I think the sad thing is that many of our residents don't realize how much it's changing. I think they're used to seeing a downtown that was different. Remember, before, both North End and South End and West End residents had a reason to go to downtown. Yes. They had to go to downtown to pay their light bill. They had to go to downtown to pay the telephone bill. They had to go to downtown to get, there was Newberry's, and G Fox was, everyone, G Fox was a store that everyone could go to because they had the basement and they had the high end. And so people actually moved around downtown and could see what was going on. And people went to Bushnell Park, and it was a neighborhood that, at the time was a neighborhood that really didn't belong to everyone. People really didn't live there. It was, it was a central neighborhood of, the economic development hub of the city, and the, Civic Center, which today is the Excel Center, and all of those pieces. However, with things changing for a while, downtown was very stagnant, and people didn't have to go to downtown from the north end or south end. You know, you didn't pay your light, you pay your light bill online. You call over the phone. You know, things have changed, so there's no reason. And all we do in downtown now is grab the bus. It's where we transfer from one bus to another, so we really don't move around. And so many residents aren't even aware of the amount of housing that is in downtown.
Exactly.
You know, I've taken residents around Bushnell Park and we've done tours, and they're like, where do they live? I'm like, that building. They're like, but that's the telephone company. I'm like, not the telephone company anymore.
For a long time.
It hasn't been the telephone company for a long time. And there are lots of plans for development in downtown. There's something called IQUILT, there, you know, Economic Development Plan, and CRDA, and changes that even, you know, that affect. So downtown has kind of developed this, you know, I call it a duplicity neighborhood. People live there, so it is a neighborhood. People vote, people interact in that neighborhood, and it also is a neighborhood that's supposed to belong to all of us. Yeah, we're not involved in the conversation about how it belongs to all of us, neither in the north end or in the south end. And so I think that that's really the conversation we need to have. Gentrification, well, what happens when you have that kind of development? And you have that kind of development in terms of housing, and, you know, let's be clear, some of it is low income, but the vast majority is not. And so we're talking about a population of people that have a significant amount of wealth. There are young professionals and others. And so at some point in time, you know, right now I believe the housing level in downtown is 95% occupied, which is the highest standard possible nationally. It's considered phenomenal to have 95% occupancy rate in any area, but for us to have it in downtown Hartford is amazing. And we're not talking about a couple hundred units. We're talking about thousands and more units online. I think there's about almost 600. My numbers might be off, but a significant amount of units coming on board. At some point, the goal is to take that 95%, convert it into a 95% residency rate. So you really want them to stay here. And the only way, you know, by that time they need to get married and they have to have kids and all of these other things, and you need them to stay in this community. And that means that you need them to own homes. And you need them to really think about where they're going to live, their school system, public safety. And so those conversations about the future of where I'm going to live and what I wanted to see are happening now with many of those residents and other people in the community. And so it is ripe for gentrification. And, you know, it's, I think, ripe for opportunities for North and South to talk about how we make that happen in a way that, you know, we want to prosper as a city, but that doesn't significantly impact us to the point where some residents can't even afford to live in the neighborhood that they're in.
Exactly. So, Mayra, that brings me to this question, because I know that I've heard the mayor say before that, you know, the city of Hartford has over, and I'm quite sure there's been nonprofits added regularly over the past year since I heard him make this comment, that we have over 100 nonprofit organizations in the city of Hartford. And with that being the case, I'm still trying to figure out, why does it feel like we're still vying to work together when it appears that the first thing that I'll see on anybody's website that I pull up is that to collaborate, to work and act effectively with each other? How well are we doing that in our communities, knowing that the basis for all of nonprofit organizations is the common good or the greater good? How are we making that happen so that when I have 3 children still at home, I'm a parent of 7 children, 4 of them are adults, and I couldn't make them stay in Hartford. They left, and they still laugh at me when they, you know, come back and be like, keep your grandbaby in the house, because I don't want him to get shot in a drive-by or something. So, you know, comments like that. And I'm like, you know, Hartford is what we make it. You know, enough of us need to stay so that we can, you know, continue to build on what, you know, a lot of generations before us tried. So that brings me back to also a first question that I asked, and I'll add it on. Can Hartford's future be better than its past? Because a lot of people, and even I have said in some meetings, I say, you know what? I just want the Hartford that I had when I was on Deerfield Avenue and Oakland Terrace with my grandmother, and there were fruit trees in the backyard. You can, you know, if you acted up, the neighbor across the street can grab you by your ear and bring you back. If I walked down to the store, the corner, there were all types of stores there, you know, fresh food out on the sidewalk, you know, the milk, you know, you got it fresh. It seemed like it came straight from the farm to your neighborhood. All of the kids played together, and the ones that did fight, we fought with hands. You know, we weren't shooting each other out there. So obviously that would be very grandiose to think I could go back to there.
It's a very nostalgic view, and many people hold on to that view. Which, you know, keeps us safe and keeps us thinking. So, I mean, we posed the question, can Hartford's future be better than its past? Primarily because most people think that the future should be like the past. And the past was great. And so is there a possibility that the future could be even better and not just equal to the great past you had? And in order to pose that question, I think part of the conversation and dialogue is not so much around cooperation, which I think this city does phenomenal. 100+ agencies, all with varying missions, some of them with duplicative missions, in my opinion, all vying for small resources in a very small population. Hartford's only 100,000 plus. So we're not talking about a lot of people who live in this.
Exactly.
And so I think part of the going into the future thing and creating a better future, not just based on what was good in the past, but what's needed in the future, is really being able to think about, what do I have to give up to have that future? And I think that that's really the difficult conversation. In our Community Builders Academy, when I teach the Community Builders Academy, one of the things that we use is called Bing, Bang, Boom. And Bing is really how we as human beings are designed to survive. We really are innately created you know, at our cellular level to stay alive. And so when you have, you know, these competing resources and needs, people tend not, you know, to cooperate as much as you can to stay alive, but not really truly to collaborate, which means that sometimes you have to give up in order to have. And people are like, what do you mean give up in order to have? In order to have that future, some of us will have to give up. And being able to so that other people can have. And I think we really, you know, all can do it. And I guess, you know, it's, you know, faith. You know, my belief is that, you know, we were created in his image, and his image is not to bing, it's to create, you know, and to be able to, you know, move things forward.
I agree.
You know, I always say Jesus Christ was the best organizer, and thank God he didn't want to be politically correct, because we wouldn't be here today. And so being able to do that, and we have to be willing to fight the fear that's within us, and be able to move out of the comfort zones and be able to say, you know, I'm willing to let go of this in order for us to create that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Mayra.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Have a blessed day.